Today is Wednesday, June 3rd, 2026. I am the interviewer Amy Moritz with Rita Liberti via Zoom. Rita grew up in Cheektowaga, graduating from Cleveland Hill in 1980. She played both slow pitch and fast pitch softball in the 1970s, including playing in the Empire State Games. A sport historian with a PhD from the University of Iowa, her area of research has been U.S. women's sport history, particularly early women's basketball in the American South. And Rita, I'm so excited to talk to you today. Thank you so much for being a part of this project. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for all your hard work thus far as well.
I will ask you just to start off. I ask everybody this to start off. Tell me about a time you first remember falling in love with sports.
Mm, gosh, great question. Oh, very, very young. I remember, not organized sport, just movement, right? I loved physical activity from, boy, I don't even, it's difficult for me. Definitely kindergarten, so age 4, 5, 6. I remember loving to move and being outdoors, whether it was snowing or blizzarding or warm and humid in the summers. I just loved being outside and moving. My first memories of organized activity, though, happened when I was around 11 or 12. I joined a playground softball team in Cheektowaga. Then there weren't the organized sports that there are now. Um, but that was my first foray into organized athletics, and boy, did I just have memories of my teammates and just the kind of softball we played and the coaches and just the feeling of community as a 11 or 12-year-old, which was kind of cool.
That is really cool. I was going to ask you about like the opportunities, the what the sports landscape was like for girls when you were growing up at that time. And it from other people I've talked with, it sounds like softball was one of those maybe first really organized opportunities for girls to kind of come together on an all girls team and play with other girls.
Yeah, definitely. I was born in 62, so I guess it was 72, 73 is when I really started playing organized. And again, it was through the playground league. There was a playground right in the field close to our home, and I would hang out there. And I actually remember Carol White was her name. She was our coach. I don't know, that name just popped into my head. She was our coach, and so yeah, it was softball that was. I don't recall there being any other organized activity, at least not that I was aware of. We were a working class community, so maybe young girls who were from wealthier families had other competitive opportunities. But those of us living in, parts of Cheektowaga did not. And so softball was it.
And you mentioned that sense of community. That must have been very exciting for someone who, like you said, you always loved movement, you always loved to be around, to now be able to have another group of like-minded people to be around all the time.
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think there were, uh, probably in school, like in middle school, I know that my physical education teacher, Elaine Hansen, um, she was very active. She actually coached the high school teams that I sort of aspired to play on when I was in middle school at Cleveland Hill. And so it was sort of looking up to her that I began to sort of get connected with girls who were involved in athletics within the school community. It was just at Title IX. I didn't know it then, but I know it now that Title IX had just passed. And so I'm sure Cleveland Hill, like a bunch of other schools, were racing to come into compliance or foot dragging to come into compliance. I'm not sure which. Um, but yeah, it was not only girls of my age that I sort of sought community with in terms of sport, but it was also looking up to older women who were physical education teachers and coaches that were doing things that I was just in awe of as a young kid.
Yeah. How important was that to have those? There were guys that were like, in the obviously guys in the sports realm, but how important it sounds like it was. Can you describe what was it that you at that age that you saw, and then maybe looking back, what is it that you see? Aha, that's what I was maybe seeing or experiencing or feeling at that time that maybe you couldn't name when you were younger.
Yeah, I think that like my mom had five sisters, and so I was surrounded by independent, strong women who were assertive in their own ways, right? I wouldn't call them feminists. I'm not sure they would call themselves feminists, but they were not taking any crap from anybody. And so I was surrounded by them, not in an athletic setting, right? But then when I started to see these athletic women who were independent, they had careers in sport, either as physical education teachers or coaches or referees, and that also was new to me. Um, and so I think it was their independence, their strength, both what I saw, physical strength, and also sort of this mental fortitude that was interesting. So I think just seeing them in those roles was really just exciting for me. I mean, it was just really, I remember, I still have such, I can viscerally, I can remember the feelings of excitement of getting ready for a game or even a practice and knowing that all these other girls and women were going to be involved too. That just wasn't happening in this early to mid 70s, uh, not like it is today. So it really was unusual.
Right. You mentioned, I mean, you were, um, so you would have been young when Title IX passed. So like as you had mentioned, so you didn't know about it, but from experiencing it and kind of maybe looking back, what was that like? Like were you seeing you wouldn't maybe know that there were more opportunities, but what were you kind of experiencing or seeing, or even when you look back to kind of see like what that transition time was kind of like?
Yeah, I think the best place to relate to that question is within Cleveland Hill. I did know that the generation of girls before me that were late 60s, early 70s, into the mid 70s, I got to high school in the fall of 76, 76, I think it was 76, 77, 76 or 77, can't remember. Um, and I do remember that there was always volleyball, basketball, and softball. Those sports were there for that earlier generation. I would love to know. I'd love to do a little bit more digging in Cleveland Hills history and find out when organized athletics actually took off. But it seemed like when I got there in the mid to late 70s, 76, 77, those sports were definitely institutionalized. We didn't have the same facilities, certainly. I remember playing on a softball field that was just a mess, and the boys' baseball field was right next to us. And so their field always looked nicer, and ours was kind of whatever. Um, I remember Coach Hansen we'd always practice in the little middle school gym, and the boys would get the main gym. It wasn't always that case, but there were things like that that I know now, looking back, were definitely separate. I remember the school though outfitted us with uniforms. I don't, I mean, Elaine would probably know better and have memories of that. But as a kid, I thought, oh, wow, it's cool that at least I'm getting opportunities to play volleyball, basketball, and softball. And of course, we'd go right through, right? Volleyball would start in the fall. We'd go right into basketball, go right into softball. Um, but it did seem like things were changing. I know right when I left Cleveland Hill, they adopted more sports for girls. Um, I think a cross country team. I think girls were welcome then on the tennis teams. I'm not exact. There was always synchronized swimming, I guess, at Cleveland Hill, but I wasn't a swimmer. Um, yeah, so it felt like a really um, even as a kid, it felt like there were opportunities there, but there were also like a ton of societal no-nos about girls in athletics that I was well aware of. Um, but I was just too excited to play. So,
Right.
yeah.
Can you, like you said, you were too excited to play. Can you say more? Do you think that some of those no-nos may have stopped some other girls who would have played or would have liked to have played?
I mean, I have no doubt. I definitely think uh, there were a number probably of my athletic that we didn't even know they were athletic peers. I mean, I used to hang out with a group of women that weren't actually in sport, but that I knew were very athletic. Like we'd played badminton in the backyard or whatever, right? But they wouldn't go out for sport. Um, and I think there was definitely still that stigma. I think obviously the homophobia was so intense then, in ways that I think also would have. really altered the course of many young girls from participating in sports, especially like softball, that would have been seen as masculine or whatever, right? Yeah, so definitely a lot of that. But for the core group of us that really loved moving, I'm not sure there was anything that would stop us. I mean, it was just too damn exciting, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you've played both slow pitch and fast pitch. So how would you describe those softball worlds in Western New York at that time?
Yeah, so I was looking back at some old stuff. So again, the earliest organized stuff was the playground leagues when I was very young, 11, 12, 13, then 14. And then I get into to high school and I'm not exactly sure how this happened, right? I don't know how. I know how I got involved in slow pitch, and that was through my coach, Elaine Hansen at Cleveland Hill. She was playing for Flash Trucking, which was the slow pitch team that we played for. Um, and she invited me and a couple of the high schoolers that I guess were decent and she thought could help the team. She invited us to play with Flash. And I remember we played, oh God, in a field downtown. I can't remember now where, but we went to tournaments on weekends. I mean, it was just, I hung out with these women, even though I was 16 or 17 and they were probably in their 20s. Um, we just hung out. It was like a family that we had, and then there was the fast pitch teams that I played on. I played for Bobeck's, which was a topless bar in the city. He sponsored a team. People often asked, did we have shirts? Yes, we did. He was actually Mr. Bobeck was an incredible supporter of women's softball. Um, and so it was the cultures of them. I don't recall them being different necessarily. The slow pitch leagues, I remember the tournaments were huge. I mean, there'd be teams from everywhere playing late into the night under the lights. Um, but I don't recall there being much difference. There might have been, but as a young person, I didn't really see it. I tended to think there were more younger women playing fast pitch, um, and I would say women in their 20s and 30s, maybe even their 40s, playing slow pitch. Not that there weren't younger women playing slow pitch, but it was definitely maybe an age thing might have been the biggest difference. Um, yeah.
What was it like? I don't want to lead you because but other people have talked about playing from that era like and earlier playing
Mhm.
with women who are old like from like teenagers up to like 30s and 40s like that wide range. What was that? Sounds like what was that experience like? What did you maybe take from that too?
A ton. I I like all things, I think I consider many of those women, even though I haven't spoken to them probably in 50 years, many of them, I consider them mentors. I remember their personalities. Um, I remember what I thought, like all humans, what I thought was good in them, and I wanted to mirror and exemplify, like, and things that I didn't think were so great and I didn't want to pursue. Um, I was so impressed, regardless, though, I was impressed with their athleticism, their commitment to the game, um, and their commitment to this community that we created every summer. Like, and I looked to them because they were older, uh, just for the kinds of ways that I think the best mentors are people who don't necessarily consider themselves mentors, but they kind of are, just by example. And there were many of them. Um, it was kind of weird though, playing. I'm not weird in a bad way. Like I remember conversations with my mom. She had trouble with me, I think, being a 16 or 17-year-old, 15, 16, 17-year-old playing with women who were older. At times, I think she was happy that they were older and that they would look out for me. And at times, a little just like, oh my God, she's going away for a weekend. I really don't know these people that well, etc. So, they weren't family. They weren't. So that was a little bit of tension there, but she, I can think of a couple of instances that she was concerned about, but she never stopped me. And it had to cost some money too. That's the part of it I don't remember. Like we had a sponsorship. We were working class. My parents were not wealthy people. And I think, gosh, I wonder how they afforded. like if we had to stay overnight in a hotel or like how who paid for that? Like did my parents pay for that? Stuff like that I'll never know probably. But yeah, so it was overall though it was an incredible mentoring experience that I wish all young women had an opportunity to have in those in that era, whether it was through sport or something else.
Yeah. Um, uh, at that era, I want to make sure I've got my timelines right too. Were you also kind of around and active during the time of like the Shamrocks and the Breskies and like those teams and leagues? And
Yeah, as a matter
I
of
feel
fact, I
like,
got Buffalo
well, there
Breskies.
you.
Yeah, I was. And the Breskies, in my professional career as a sport historian, I ended up meeting and interviewing a lot of women who played pro ball. Some of them came through Buffalo. They played for the San Jose Sunbirds, etc. So I'd share with them my earliest memories when it must have been 76. And my mom took me to Bresky's games. She and I don't know what my mother thought. What the heck? She probably thought, what the hell have I raised here? But I just wanted to go to games. And so she took me and we'd sit and I'd always want to be in the front row, usually right behind the catcher if I could. But yeah, I remember Cindy Bresky. I never knew her, but I remember watching her play. Um, I was just astounded by that athleticism. It just, it floored me. Blown away by it. And I so looked forward to going to as many games as possible. Again, I don't know how my mom did it. My mom worked nights, and so taking me to these games, I don't know. She must have had to go to work right after or something, but I don't recall going to games with anybody other than my mom. Um, yeah, so they were another whole group of people I didn't know, the professional women's, but that they
Mhm.
were around in the 70s, I think was another way in which women's competitive sport sort of filtered into my reality, and made me aware that there was more out there than just my little silo.
Right. Yeah. They predated me. Not by much, but they predated me. But like where I understand too, the games were very well attended and there were they had lots of fans. So not just to see them performing or playing, but also to see people there interested in supporting them had to be really impressionable for someone growing up at that time too.
Definitely. And I think that there's always this misconception about women's sport that it started with Caitlin Clark, the enthusiasm around women's sport. And while the crowds may have been smaller than they might be today for the women's, for example, College World Series, it was still a big enthusiastic crowd. Um, the game against the Breakettes when Joan Joyce, who got was pitching, and I don't know if you know that name, but if you can watch video of her, she was by far the best pitcher in that league, and she you couldn't even see the ball. I mean, the ball would come in and she wouldn't see, and the crowd would just be like in awe of her. I remember the cheers, and somebody would get a base hit off of Joyce, and it was like, the world had turned on the axis or something. Um, but no, I remember the energy in the stadium. It wasn't a huge stadium. I'm guessing now maybe 1,000, 2,000 people, but I don't actually remember. I just remember the noise, the sort of cacophony of cheers when women get hits or whatever, Buffalo would perform well. Uh, yeah, so a lot of that. Funny, I'm thinking of things that I hadn't thought about in a bunch of years. So thanks.
And happy memories, right? Hopefully, good things like that.
Very.
Yeah, it doesn't like, and I think that it's part of like talking about memory too. Like, it doesn't necessarily matter if it was 1,000 or 10,000. If they were all there and loud and into the game, it's a whole. It creates an atmosphere that I think, especially when you're younger, is very impressionable as to the value that it has to play.
Yeah, and I didn't, you don't know this until you're older, right? Looking back on it,
Right. Yeah.
but the moments were so powerful that I remember, the clarity of my memory, um, in so many episodes across my young life in Buffalo. Um, were tied to athletics, and they're so sharp. I don't have many other memories of anything else that happened in Buffalo except snow. But my memories of sport were, and the young women and older women that influenced me are still so, uh, like keen in my head.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What back then when you're playing, what did being an athlete mean to you?
It meant being able to, it felt very freeing. I wasn't always the best on the field. Like I was a decent athlete, I think, right? But there was something about moving well and being able to move well and then display those talents. So there was a public piece of this too. There was a lot of internal stuff too, just feeling good about moving and being with other people that enjoyed moving too. It wasn't as much about the competition for me. It never was. I mean, I like to win, of course. I hate to lose, but I
Mhm.
really loved my body in motion. Um, those are the things that I think about when I think about playing and strategy. And as I got better and I got good coaching, just how to read the other team, how to read what they were going to do. That was especially so, I think, in my volleyball years. Softball too. I had a we Elaine Hansen was our coach at Cleveland Hill through my junior year, I think, and then Nan Harvey. I don't know if that name has ever come up.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Nan was an incredible woman who took over the Cleveland Hill team that I played on in my senior year. She took over all the sports. She might have. I just remember her in softball. And she was just an amazing coach. I mean, she really was. And then she actually helped me when I went on to college in Pennsylvania. She would come down and help the pitchers and the catchers. Um, but I forgot what your question was now, but she was astounding. It was just that, and also like getting that good coaching and then fine tuning your skills and then performing better maybe in the next game or the next event. That was also really cool, like to feel like I was getting better because of good coaching and maybe watching others perform. Um, that was also, but it's so freeing, liberating. There weren't many spaces where I think young people could feel that, especially young women. And it was just nice to be able to move like that.
Yeah. Uh, you know, uh, Being able to move like that, but then also have some success. You played in the Empire State Games.
In
Tell me
volleyball.
about in volleyball. Okay, so tell me about that experience.
Yeah, that was volleyball ended up, even though I'm short, I was only 5'4", about 5'2" now, but so I was a back row specialist, as Sally Kuss would say. But yeah, I think Sally, I'm not even sure how I got to try out for those games. I played 2 years. Maybe it was through my affiliation knowing Sally through the Flash softball. I actually don't remember. But I tried out, went to Sweet Home, had a tryout, and I made the team. And I think I played between my sophomore and junior year, and my junior and senior year of high school. And uh, wow. I mean, we were a Division 4 school. Cleveland Hill was the smallest school division. And so here I was playing with young girls who were Division 1 athletes in Western New York. And their level of skill was just amazing. Like it's the same level of skill that the best volleyball players have today. There were just fewer of us then, right? I mean, there were more
Mhm.
women, young girls who are just amazing volleyball players. Some of the girls that I played with in the Empire Games were that good. I mean, they could play today and hold their own, right? Um, but it was what I remember the most about those experiences were the workouts we had at Sweet Home leading up to the games. I remember the games very well, actually, in Syracuse. But like the lead up, Sally Kuss and the assistant coach Denise LaRouche, um, the combination of those two women made, I think, some of the best coaching I have had anywhere or seen anywhere. Uh, I don't know what those are personalities that seemed to make it work, but they were extraordinary coaches and people still are, I think. I don't know if Denise is still around, but I know Sally is. Um, their workouts were extremely tough. I don't think I've ever worked as hard in my life but we needed to be playing against the very best. So but they were also interested in who you were as a person, which was kind of cool, you know. I remember riding on the back of Sally's motorcycle. She would take me to and from practices when my mom couldn't pick me up. Um, Again, just and it was at another level. That level of play was just something else, really. And then getting a chance to go to the games in Syracuse was otherworldly at that point. You know, we didn't have those sorts of things. And since then I have two very close friends who live in Syracuse, and I've gone back to the campus a number of times. And I remember sitting with my teammates. It was after a game, it was humid. We were sitting outside the little gym we were playing in, and we were looking out in Syracuse on the campus there there's a cemetery that borders the campus, Syracuse University. And I remember looking out and I don't even know what we were talking about, me and my teammates. But we're just chatting and having a good time. And I remember it. And then just a couple of years ago, I went back to that very spot. And I thought, oh my God, I've been here before. And I realized it was the spot that I sat with my teammates at the Empire Games in 1970, whatever, 677. Um, and that was kind of fun. Um, yeah. Wow, there were some girls from Orchard Park that were amazing. The women from Sweet Home, holy cow. I mean, they were exposed to Sally's coaching all the time. And here um, so that was, yeah, the coaching and the community of being around those other young women. And I just remember my volleyball skills, like I so loved that game. I think had I been taller, better setter's hands, maybe I would have done something. But I never played competitively again after I left high school. But
Mhm.
yeah,
That was pretty, competitive though to be on those Empire State Game teams. To be part of that. Um, Outside of like do you remember that time? I remember the Empire State Games and what the Empire State Games, especially at that time, maybe provided for girls and women in athletics. I mean, that was high level state competition. And I know you still had that at the high school and the collegiate level, but it almost feels like that was a really important driver for for more development and for the development of girls sports in the area.
yeah. I mean, I'd love to have a conversation with some elders, some people who are coaches, and maybe even the organizers of the games, because and that girls were invited. It wasn't like it was an event for boys, you know. I don't know how many athletic events there were for girls then in the 70s, but yes, the chance to play, we didn't have those. Like when we went to softball, I guess we did play in some tournaments that were statewide, maybe even a national at one point. I can't remember now, but no, there with that age group, with high schoolers, that kind of intensity was not happening yet. Like Cleveland Hill, we would have our own division. We'd have a champion from our own division, but that was teams like, the small schools in Western New York. Playing outside of that didn't happen. Um, so yeah, and even when I got to college and I played softball, we had a state softball tournament, but it was nothing compared to the volleyball that I played at the Empire Game, the opening ceremonies, just the kind of fanfare around it, um, and just the enormity of it, that there were so many other athletes from around the state that were joining you in this. As an adult now, looking back, I think, oh my God, what organization that was, and costs too. Again, I'm not sure who's paying for what, but yeah, I think definitely decades ahead of its time, especially for girls' activities. Um, yeah. Hmm.
Your career, your academic career is sport history, and so obviously, you've kind of kept in that realm. So it probably, a little bit of a normal step from being an athlete to then like create. But how did you go about like looking at that, and then how did being an athlete maybe inform what you wanted to do when you were in school and career wise, and inform your research too?
Yeah, I mean, sport was always such a central part of my life. I didn't know as a young person what that would mean career-wise. As I said, I started to see it in teachers and coaches, etc. But I wasn't clear. My parents hadn't gone to college. Nobody in my family had gone to school, so I didn't know what that looked like. But I got glimpses of it through these older women that had gone to college and were either athletes, maybe not like would become a generation later, but they had gone to college to be physical education teachers, et cetera. And they, again, were my role models. So I remember I was thinking about this the other day when I was in eighth grade. I in English class and we had to write essays or whatever, and mine were always about sport. They were just always about sport. And I remember the teacher at the time, I won't mention his name, said, Rita, at some point you're going to have to write an essay about something other than sport. And I remember looking at him and saying, why? Like, why would I do that? Um, and I didn't. And so I would, love to speak to him today about that because it was my career. But no, and then I got after when I was a physical education major when I went to Edinburgh, what was then Edinburgh State College in Edinburgh, Pennsylvania. And and I just knew that I assumed I was going to be a physical education teacher for the rest of my life, which would have been fine. I saw what they do, and that was cool. And this was in the 80s, so things were still opening up. My experiences in college and softball were not great. The university, and I'll say this publicly, and please leave this in, Edinburgh at that time dragged its feet, really dragged its feet around Title IX compliance. I knew it then, and I certainly know it now. And that was unfortunate because there were some good athletes there. Um, but I got to play softball there, which was nice. And I got to do a whole bunch of intramurals and continue to, sort of get better at softball, I think, as I went through my years there. Got to the end of it, end of my, undergraduate degree, and realized that, gosh, it was the mid 80s. There was no work. So I just went back to graduate school at Slippery Rock. I got a master's degree and again, athletic administration. Still not knowing quite what I was going to do, but I figured having a master's degree couldn't hurt. Continued to play sport, whenever I could. I was getting a little older, so I was diversifying a little bit. I started long distance running and doing some other things. Um, and I landed a great job at a small college in Ohio. It was the only branch campus of Bowling Green State called Firelands College. It was a 2-year school. It still is there in Huron, Ohio, near Sandusky. And I was supposed to teach physical activity classes, and I was still really involved in sport. At this point, I was marathoning. Um, and so and I was still playing volleyball. Actually, I played in a rec league there. I played in a softball league in Ohio. Um, but long distance running became my passion at that point. And then I got an opportunity. I saw some work going on at the University of Iowa. I knew that sport was still in it, right? I was playing a little less because as I was getting older, I was doing, not so into the games I was into as a kid. But Iowa had a program, a PhD program, basically in women's sport and culture. And I thought, oh my God, this is like made for me. I gotta go. I gotta go. So I went and I got in and I spent some years there and had a history course and decided that women's sport history would be my path. And when people talk to me even today, they're always eager to talk to me about present contemporary women's sport. And I'm like, yeah, I actually, I mean, I'll talk to anybody about women's sport, but it's women's sport history that it's its past more than its present that intrigues me and always has.
Mhm.
I think even when I was a
Yeah.
kid, even when I was young at Cleveland Hill, I was interested in like the women that came before me. Like I wondered even then, like I wonder what their experiences were. I wonder like I didn't ask the questions because I was, too young, I guess. But so yeah, history's always been a part of it. And I was so thankful that despite that eighth grade English teacher, I always got to have sport be my world. Um, and I'm thankful that I grew up in Western New York. In that way, it wasn't, as I said, there were plenty of obstacles, but there was also enough of a groundswell of support that, and I wonder now too if like the circles I was in, they were mostly working class, middle class, and I keep coming back to class because I think it's really important. it was mostly working class, middle class homes and communities that I was affiliated with. And I wonder if that we didn't carry with us just some ways of being a girl in the world that, you could be ride your bike all over the place, get dirty, get your knees skinned up, sliding into second base. I mean, just what you did, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, then I got to Iowa, and then had a nice career out in California for several decades, and finishing that up now, even though I'm back in Massachusetts, I'm teaching. But it's been that experience has led me to um, several years ago, I got to meet and have a conversation with Billie Jean King and sit with her privately for a couple of hours. And I mentioned my Western New York upbringing and what it was like for me to see her in the lead up to Bobby Riggs, the Battle of the Sexes in 1973. And I remember going with my tennis racket. I had an old tennis racket, going behind the school, the elementary school there, Cleveland Hill in Tyranda, there, the little circle off of Harlem. And I went up there and I just hit the tennis ball against the wall. And Billie Jean said to me that day, just 10 years ago, "So did you end up playing any tennis?" I said, "No, kids from my neighborhood did not play tennis. No, we played softball." She said, "Oh, that's too bad." But she was actually lovely. But she was one of those people like the Breskis and others. They were in my world, right? I
Mhm.
saw the King match on TV with Riggs. I went to see the Breskis. So there were, I'm sure other women too, other young girls were seeing these examples in their worlds in the 70s. Yeah.
Yeah. As you, like you mentioned, like people, you'll talk to anybody about women's sports, but you're more interested and always have been kind of in that history and kind of what came before. What do you think deserves more attention
Mm.
when, looking back that we don't give enough attention to,
Gosh,
especially when it comes to women's sports?
there's so much. I mean, like, I guess like all history, most 20-year-olds think history started when they were born, right? Or whatever. So people
Mhm.
don't think about life before them. I think my work with African American women's basketball in the American South in the 30s, that research just really opened my eyes to understanding how little we know about these enthusiastic pockets of women's sport history that's always been there. When I see African American women playing in the WNBA today and playing, I think their legacy is rooted in their grandmothers, their great grandmothers. And matter of fact, I've had athletes, not female athletes, but I'm not gonna remember his name now. He played for the Buffalo Braves when they had a basketball team. Remember the Buffalo Braves? They were a men's
Yes.
basketball team in the city. Yeah. Oh, what was his name? Anyway, I interviewed his grandmother who played basketball in North Carolina in the 30s. And he said that he learned his basketball from her. And so it's those kinds of stories, like contemporary athletes, their legacy, their roots are, whether they know it or not, are grounded in these histories that we know little about. So I think African American, and there's so many other, right? Indigenous people's history, we know so little. Um, and gosh knows every other. I think working class white women and communities of color, especially in cities like Buffalo, we don't know enough. Um, and that's unfortunate. It's been sort of held to the margins of history. And because there are few records left and there's little sort of material history um, to make a history out of. And it's really that's the unfortunate part. But like I'm big on the class thing, as I mentioned, but I think there's some factory teams both in Buffalo and around the Northeast, including throughout New England, where I live now, where those activities, they were from the earliest 20th century on. These women, not maybe not playing softball, but they were certainly playing basketball in those early years. And we know very, very little about how they came to the game, how they experienced it, what it did for them in terms of community, what the community around them thought of them. You know, all of that is probably work for a future historian, I hope. But yeah, so I think marginalized communities, not that, I don't mean to sound as though wealthy white women who had access to any number of sports don't deserve a history. I'm not saying that, but there are plenty of records of their work. Usually, if there's going to be any records, it's going to be from those women. So, like I live near Smith College, and their archives are just phenomenal, right? They've got so much. And if you go to the factory, the women same age who played basketball in the factory just 5 miles from the campus at the same time, there's very little of their past, and that's history, but that's also very sad to me.
It is. There's every time I talk to people, I have more research projects in my brain that I would love to that there's not enough time to do. Rita, anything that we didn't touch on that when you were thinking about that you wanted to make sure that you brought up or shared?
Um, I let me think. There's a lot. I mean, I'm sure as the day wears on today, I'll be memories will be coming up for me, but um, I know I wasn't the only one that this mattered, right? That this was such a foundational piece of their life. And I think being raised in Buffalo, the in Cheektowaga especially, the the gritty um kind of just people just worked, and I think our sports and our games came from that. And so being able to, I think, grow up in that era, despite the challenges, and the people who said girls shouldn't be doing that sort of thing, it I think the community around Buffalo at times really helped to foster um, girls' sport in ways that maybe other communities were, maybe some weren't. Um, yeah, so I don't know how much I've given you, but anyway.
You've given me a ton, Rita. This has been fantastic. Like, thank you so much for your time,
Yeah.
um, and for sharing your stories. Yeah.